In this, our 5th year of the Critical Conversations About Diversity and Justice series. The Critical Conversation series is co-sponsored by the University Libraries. The libraries have developed a list of further academic resources on each of our Critical Conversation topics, which you can link to on our Critical Conversations webpage. We continue to offer live streaming of our conversations so that you can watch via our website in real time or at a later date, since they will be archived on our Critical Conversations webpage. And we've added an opportunity for you to provide feedback on the series. If you signed in, we will email you a link to an online evaluation, or you can access that again on our webpage. As with all of our conversations, we'll start with some discussion among our panelists and moderator, and then move out into the audience for question and answers. I'd now like to introduce our moderator, my colleague for this conversation, Kimberly Hewitt. Kimberly Hewitt is the Director of the Office for Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action here at the University of Minnesota, and the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Office for Equity and Diversity. Prior to coming to the university in the fall of 2007, she served as Assistant Dean for Students and Multicultural Affairs at Hamline University School of Law. Ms. Hewitt has 14 years of experience practicing law in the areas of employment, labor, and education. She was previously a partner in the law firm Ryder Bennett and has served as an in-house attorney for the Minneapolis Public Schools. Ms. Hewitt holds a AB from Stanford University and a JD from the University of Minnesota Law School. Please welcome Kimberly Hewitt.
Thank you, Anne. I'm not used to having other people introduce me. That really sounds nice when you say it. So, good afternoon and welcome to Critical Conversations About Diversity and Justice, sponsored by the Office for Equity, Diversity, and the Libraries. So I'll be moderating the panel discussion today on police, prisons, and legal power, reforming our United States system of justice. And I was thinking today, this is, always a topic that's important and timely, and I think today, this week, there were a couple of announcements that are really pertinent to this topic. You may have heard that the president-elect announced his candidate for Attorney General, Republican Senator Jeff Sessions. So someone who is not expected to continue to advance the civil rights agenda of the current Attorney General or the agenda around criminal justice reform. So kind of on the other end of the spectrum, I'm sure most of us heard on Wednesday about the announcement that a police officer was charged with second-degree assault in the death of Philando Castile. So two big announcements kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum when we think about this topic. So I'm going to start by introducing the members of the panel. And so first closest to me, Paul Schnell, became the Chief of Police for the Maplewood, Minnesota Police Department in July of 2013. Paul has also held law enforcement positions in Hastings, St. Paul, and Carver County, Minnesota. Paul is an adjunct faculty member at both the University of St. Thomas and St. Catherine, as well as Metropolitan State University. I should add that Paul was also at the university this past fall, and he did some education for the student sexual misconduct panel that we just created here at the University of Minnesota, so thank you for that. Paul holds a Bachelor of Social Work degree from the University of St. Thomas and a master's degree in organizational leadership from St. Catherine University. He's both a Minnesota licensed police officer and a social worker. Next to Paul, Justin Terrell. Justin is the program manager for Justice for All, or J4A, at Take Action Minnesota, where his work focuses on removing barriers to employment and democracy for families impacted by the justice system. Under his leadership, J4A successfully moved Target Corporation to change their hiring practices across the country. Through this campaign, J4A was instrumental in passing a statewide law removing questions pertaining to criminal records from employment applications, or Ban the Box. For this work, Justin was awarded the 2014 Facing Race Ambassador Award by the St. Paul Foundation. Following this success, J4A has worked in coalition on many issues ranging from voting rights restoration, expansion of expungements, sentencing reform, and continues to advance a justice system reform policy agenda. J4A has even taken the fight for Ban the Box to the White House in 2015, moving President Obama to expand the practice for federal employment opportunities. Justin has led racial justice and leadership development training across the country and in Central Europe. He has a bachelor's degree in social work with over 10 years experience working with youth and families in crisis. As a civil rights advocate, Justin served for 6 years on the Minneapolis Civilian Review Authority, advocating for police accountability. With coursework towards a master's in advocacy and political leadership, he aims to complete school someday and use his experience as an organizer to continue to build power for his community. Justin lives in South Minneapolis with his wife and son and is a lifelong friend and mentor to a dynamic young man from North Minneapolis. Next, on Justin's left, Mary Moriarty has been a public defender in Minneapolis for all of 6 weeks when she had her first felony suppression hearing. She prepped diligently and argued tenaciously and lost both the motion and the subsequent trial. She was right about the issue at hand, however, and a couple of years later, when the United States Supreme Court granted certiorari, Moriarty, who can laugh now about it, couldn't be pried away from her case slide to attend the oral arguments. Next time, she told herself. Fast forward 2 decades, Moriarty has not had another occasion to argue before the Supreme Court, High Court, but she has tried a dozen murders and countless other serious felony cases, including a number that set important state court precedents. In the process, she's acquired a national profile as a gifted courtroom advocate with a talent for training others in the creative, powerful trial skills she uses to secure acquittal after acquittal. The Chief Public Defender of the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office, Moriarty has taught attorneys, judges, investigators, and paralegals in every region of the country. She is a core faculty member of Gideon's Promise and the 2015 recipient of the Stephen B. Bright Award. She serves on the faculty of public defender trial schools in Minnesota, Kentucky, Illinois, and Wisconsin. She was a faculty member for the NACDL Cardozo Forensic College in New York, as well as the Harvard Law School Trial Advocacy Workshop. She is a frequent contributor of webinars and blog posts for the National Association for Public Defense. Her NACDL presentation, Tuning Your Ear to the Off-Key on Prosecutorial Misconduct, was featured in the April 2009 issue of The Champion. And last but not least, Dr. Keith Mays is an associate professor in the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Minnesota College of Liberal Arts. And he is the Arthur Red Motley Exemplary Teacher. Dr. Mays earned his PhD in history from Princeton University. His teaching, research, and practical interests include the civil rights and Black Power movement, education policy and history, Black holiday traditions, racial equity, and critical ethnic studies pedagogy and the history of African Americans. Dr. Mays was the previous chairperson of the Department of African American and African Studies and was also the director of undergraduate studies. Dr. Mays established the Mays Educational Group and Black Curriculum and Cultural Innovations LLC, which provides consultation, workshop, and training services in the areas of institutional diversity and equity, curriculum development, critical ethnic studies pedagogy, and Black mentoring and student retention. Dr. Mays has lectured widely throughout the Twin Cities metro area in K-12 schools, churches, municipal governments, and corporations. He's appeared on various media outlets such as KMOJ, KARE 11 News, WCCO, KSTP, Minnesota Public Radio, Radio Minnesota, and National Public Radio. So thank you all for agreeing to participate on the panel. So I wanted to start by asking you each if you could just share a little bit about what you do that you think is really most relevant to this topic.
I'm gonna let somebody else go first.
Okay. Just pass the mic.
We were talking.
Sorry, I'll start. As Chief Public Defender, I get to do a lot of policy work. One thing that's really fascinating to me is I spent Monday all day at a GARE training, which is the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, and I was sitting next to this young woman who's a police officer from Maplewood, and she was telling me about this fantastic police department, and I thought, I have to meet this person, and there's Paul here. I just got back from being in Atlanta at the Facing Race conference, which was excellent. And the reason I've spent a lot of time studying, training race in the criminal justice system is because I see it every day with our clients, with our staff of color. I'll tell you that about 3 months ago, one of our young lawyers of color was on a jury panel, and the judge didn't know who he was and asked everybody, do any of you know any judges? And our young lawyer raised his hand, and the judge said, well, how do you know judges? And he said, well, I don't know them personally, but I know quite a few of them. And what do you think the judge said? Then you must have a record. Yeah. Hennepin County 3 months ago. In talking to our lawyer, I said, how are you? And he said, you know, at first I was taken aback. Now it's just another day in the life of a person of color. So I endeavored to try to figure out what that was. What is another day in the life of a person of color in Hennepin County? And so since then, our office has had 2 facilitated discussions on race. I'm part of a group trying to bring racial equity to our programs in Hennepin County. We're having extensive discussions about bail. I can give you all kinds of numbers about the numbers of African Americans and people of color who are in the criminal justice system compared to the population. This is an issue that we really need to address. So those are just a few of the things that I have been working on.
I would say that as a professor here at the U, I've been teaching here for 13 years, and I teach the things that actually occur in the streets. So whether it's courses on African American history or the civil rights and Black Power movement, it's one thing to actually study that and understand it at an abstract level. It's entirely different to actually go out into the community and to begin to do the kind of work that I do in the area of education, particularly in K-12 schools, and to meet students that seemingly are on the margins of the educational process and have already at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old have been in and out of the system. My work is directly with Black students, whether it's K-12 or 12 to 16. I spend my life trying to ensure that Black students succeed in the educational processes at all levels. But it's one thing now to be out there working with community justice organizations, working with K-12 schools, seeing Black students who in many ways will end up, if they have not already ended up, inside the criminal justice system. So I hope the conversation at some point gets back to prevention. The question of prevention is the breakdown of our school systems and our educational processes that in many ways allows students to be vulnerable and to not have a future that would allow them to be productive citizens in society. And I enter into this conversation, into this work, by seeing these students already on the wrong track. And you can kind of see where they're heading. I'll say more about that.
So, for me, this has been, I mean, simply put, it's a journey, right? I think it has, I like many of the folks have already said, have seen and witnessed the reality of the significant level of inequity and unfairness and disparity that exists in the system. And I can tell you that in the community that I work and that I serve, we publish our data every week in terms of the arrests, and I will tell you that there is profound disparities. And we are attempting to unpack what that's all about, and engage in these conversations that are that speak directly to those types of outcomes. And as we look to find solutions within the institution that we represent in the system, I think one of the most interesting things is we've been talking a tremendous amount about we need to train different. We need to train folks, cops, to respond differently to these calls. And while certainly I think training has a role and a piece, I begin to wonder if the level of disconnection between the police officers that are working in our communities and the very communities that they serve, especially across issues of difference, is not fundamentally one of the issues, and might begin to be the solution to reducing some of the implicit bias, the outcomes of implicit bias that exist. So for me, that's we have to look at this as a big multi kind of phased intervention if we want to make it more fair and equitable. And I'm honored to be with a group of smart people to walk away from here learning something and hopefully being able to fix this in Maplewood after we're done. So thanks.
Thank you. How's everybody feeling? Good, good. So my name is Justin Terrell. I work for Take Action Minnesota. I run a program called Justice for All. So first I'll just kind of break down what Take Action is. So we're a statewide, multiracial organization focused on building independent political power. So we do everything from endorsing candidates and supporting candidates running for office. We are progressive as all progressive can be. So Ilhan Omar, we were the first organization to endorse Ilhan Omar for her candidacy, and we went to the streets and door knocked and made sure that she got passed through the primary process. So that's like an example of what we do as an organization. We also have these different issue areas, so healthcare, climate justice, and economy. So we're like 15 now or whatnot, even though that's not one of our campaigns. But I run the justice work, the criminal justice reform, like chunk under Take Action Minnesota, and right now, you know, it's funny because we're not really tripping, right? Like, you know, we have members across the state who are incarcerated, family members who have loved ones who are incarcerated, people in greater Minnesota who are formerly incarcerated and convicted and have criminal records. I have a criminal record. And, you know, Wednesday was the same as Monday for all of us, right? Like, we know we have a criminal justice system that is designed to protect the profits and property of the wealthy and divide and control the rest of us. And so our fight stays the same. So some of the campaigns that, if you really how I operate is basically like a campaign manager. So we run campaigns. So we ran a Ban the Box campaign, and we've worked on, last year we stopped a private prison from opening in Western Minnesota. Right now our top focus is restoration of voting rights. So on election day, there are 51,000 Minnesotans who are currently on probation who did not get an I voted sticker because it's illegal for them to vote. So these are people who pay taxes, folks who can't decide, you know, can't vote for the fools who spend their taxes. These are folks who, you know, public schools, send their kids to public schools and can't vote for school board. These are people who, you know, live in community and have no say in who governs community. And so can't vote for sheriff, can't vote for judges, people that have stood before judges and sat in cells and cannot, their voice is silenced in regards to who makes those decisions. And this is like our #1 campaign. And so other issues we work on are Ban the Box 2.0. So Ban the Box is actually like this low-hanging fruit of an issue where it's like, don't ask people about the criminal record on the application. The university is wrestling with this issue right now. But we also want to change how employers use background checks. 90% of employers use background checks. We also would like to see a change in how employers use drug testing, because, I mean, there's a much bigger conversation there. Our members also care about housing. They care about policing, which obviously we'll be talking about today, so I won't get too much into that right now. But and my job is to just bring all these people together and figure out a path to victory on these issues, and it's been a lot of fun. Good?
So I had to tweak my first question a little because of the announcement of the Attorney General. But so I guess I'll just sort of ask you to more generally comment on, you know, how you think the announcement of the Attorney General might impact efforts for bipartisan criminal justice reform. Maybe you don't think it really exists anyway, or you sort of touched on this, Justin, a little bit already, you know, how to just maybe stay the course and continue to do your work given what you think might be the realities about how that issue, the issue of reform might be addressed in the future.
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
Yeah, anyone watch Saturday Night Live and Dave Chappelle? It's just funny. It's like the split screen. He said, I got white people on both sides screaming, ah, or like the white riot in Seattle or wherever. Was it Seattle? I'm being stereotypical now. There's a lot of white people in Seattle. Portland, thank you. It was in Portland. Thank you. They're all mad hipsters, causing. But it's like, in reality, like, and then I talk to my guys who are in prison, and there's a lot of Trump supporters in prison, right? And now they're like, man, we're gonna be on lockdown before the end of the week because these guys are going crazy. Like, it's just, look, I want to just be clear. America has always been racist, has always been sexist and full of misogyny. Like, this is who we are, and so nothing is different. Nothing is different. The day before, just because we had a black man in the White House doesn't mean who put Eric Holder and all the great work, the clemency work that they were doing, all that work was great work. But the entire federal government is the largest racist misogynistic institutional system that we have in this country. And it has always been that way. It's that way today. And so until we start to wrestle with what is steeped in the fabric of who we are as a country, like, we are going to continue to be surprised when fascists take over the White House. So stop being surprised. That's my first thing. The second thing I'll just say is that, like, reforms that we've made, like, obviously a lot of them are going to get rolled back. So what I was happy to see on Wednesday after the re-election was all the people in the streets, because reality is we're going to have to take it to the streets. Right? It's so much for the historical lessons, right, Professor? Like it is today we are making history, and we are gonna have to, like, confront corporate power and people who aim to profit off of black bodies in cells. We are going to have a real conversation with U.S. Bank and how much money they make from phone calls of incarcerated people. We are going to have a conversation with Victoria's Secret and the fact that their underwear that they make is made by inmates. We have to have a conversation with all these corporations who are profiting off of prisons. And I need to remind you that as we are thinking about this, the power that we need to build in order to continue this work, the largest strike in the history of the United States is happening right now. And the fact that there are thousands of prisoners who are refusing to go to work across this country. Guards are joining them. People are standing up and demanding better working conditions and abolishing slave labor and slave wages in prisons as we speak. And no one is talking about that. No one is talking about that. And they're afraid to talk about it because they know that that's how we continue the work that we started. So I'm not tripping. I'm not worried about who's in the White House or who's the new Attorney General or any of that, because I know that our power ultimately doesn't come from those folks. I had a meeting with Valerie Jarrett at the White House, and who's a top official in the White House, right? She's a nice lady, but she's not, her job is to react to what the demands that we have. And as long as we continue to have demands, we can move power structures and shift and create shifts and changes for what's best for our community. Yeah, I'll pass it.
So I mentioned I was in Atlanta for this Facing Race conference, and I went to a breakout session for white people. And it was run by a black woman who created a white allies group in Ferguson. And it was a wake-up call that I think a lot of us needed. She said, so why are you all surprised? We're not surprised. Today's no different than any other day. And one woman raised her hand and said, well, I've just been grieving. And the woman said, over what? And the woman said, well, the election. And the woman running the session said, because you didn't get your way? Because that's a really white privilege way of looking at it. Or are you grieving over what's going to happen with people of color? And so basically the message was the same. Not a whole lot changed in a lot of ways. And so we need to get over that and figure out what to do now. Where I do think there is a difference, the Department of Justice has actually been really good on a few issues. They have, for instance, issued a statement of interest in a suit out of Georgia where poor people were being held in jail before their cases were resolved on money or bail they couldn't afford. And the Department of Justice issued a statement of interest saying that that was unconstitutional. Just, I think, 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice issued a statement of interest in a Virginia class action case, which argues that you cannot take away someone's driver's license without an inquiry into ability to pay. Do we do that here in Minnesota? No. We take people's driver's license away if they don't pay their fines or if they don't show up in court. There's no inquiry into ability to pay. And so if that lawsuit is successful there, and even if it's not, it's something we're trying to figure out how to bring here. So there are some ways that the Department of Justice was trying to work on systemic change. Having said that, there are also groups. One is called, and Alec could forgive me, there's a man named Alec Karakazanis out of Harvard, and he started a group called Equal Justice Under Law. They're the group that's been filing a lot of lawsuits against Ferguson, Mississippi, places like that. They have, and I just got this email this week in the last couple of days, there has been a historic settlement with Jennings, Missouri, where Jennings has agreed to pay $4.75 million to 2,000 people who were held in bail because they couldn't pay fees and fines. So that's a private organization there doing a lot of really good work. So even though the DOJ might not continue to do some of these really great things, the reality is a lot of stuff we can accomplish on a local basis. I was bending Justin's ear about, hey, we have to talk after this because I think many of you know about drug sentencing reform in the last legislative session. Well, there was a meeting of the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission a couple of weeks ago. It had been assumed, when you look at somebody's crime, you also in Minnesota look at their criminal history. And the Sentencing Guidelines Commission employees had been training all of us, you've got to look at the old drug cases and figure out what they would be now to figure out a person's criminal history. And what we learned a couple of weeks ago is the Guidelines Commission has decided, no, we're going to count those the same way as they were. If they were a first-degree sale, it's going to remain a first-degree sale, even though it wouldn't be a first-degree sale under the drug reform. So there's a public hearing coming up in December, and that's one way where systemic racism continues to exist. What could possibly justify that? And what we heard was it's hard for probation to go back and try to calculate the criminal history with the appropriate weight, so let's just screw people over, evidently. But that's a way that we can fight back and say, no, there's drug reform, we're not going to put up with this, we're going to put pressure on judges, we're going to do all the things that you are doing and more to try to make sure we continue to have systemic change here in Minnesota, because we do need it.
I would just want to briefly add, I'll bridge the 2 points and answer Kimberly's question to say that it does matter who's in office at local and state and national levels. I think that there's going to be a manifest difference between a Jeff Sessions and a Loretta Lynch. There's going to be a manifest difference in the policies of a Barack Obama versus a Donald Trump. And I think that what can bridge the two is the grassroots struggle that Justin talked about. I think that I always tell my students that no public official rolls out of bed and passes new laws that benefits them. It's always about who's going to struggle on the ground. That grassroots community-based organizing is always important, and in many ways is the key to getting any new policies passed. Right, so the community-based organizations as well as public officials have to work together on this. And I always said, because the last week was very difficult for all of us, that it's important for us to vote our political interests and not our political candidate. So a lot of people stayed away from the polls because Bernie was not the nominee, or they didn't like Hillary from one reason or another. But again, the result of those various decisions is that not only do you get Trump, but you get everything that comes along with him. And that's what we fail to see every single election, because you don't think about the implications of the election and a Jeff Sessions and everybody who will be part of his cabinet and will be part of the federal government. So the two go hand in hand, the grassroots struggles as well as progressive, and I'll put progressive in quotations, progressive Democratic candidates and politicians, because again, that, you know, we can, once we get them in office, we can pull them in a room and close the doors and say, this is what the fuck you gonna do for these communities. But until then, we gotta understand that the political interests are much more important than the political candidates.
And I would just say, I'm in a weird spot, just given the conversation, this kind of conversation, just given my role, because we have traditionally, or have at least attempted to really try and stay somewhat apolitical. But that doesn't mean I'm not concerned about the fact that I think about things like the work that has been done by the DOJ around data collection efforts, around consent decrees that are incredibly important to bringing about systemic change. But I think one of the areas that, and this is just a personal interest, so one of the areas is I think about what does in the incoming administration, what does the appointee to the director of VAWA, the Violence Against Women office, what does that look like? And we made really significant progress, and we have a lot of work to do. And I think, to your point, these are the kind of the ripple effects of these things that frequently don't get thought about. And those are the places that I think I'm concerned, because I think it could become very easy for us to take strides backwards, and which speaks to the importance of the work of Justin and Justice for All. I mean, we have to have it. We have to. That push has to be there. Otherwise, I worry that there will be loss.
Sorry, I knew I would forget at least once. What strategies do you think we can employ as individuals to try to address the imbalances that we know exist, kind of given this new reality that it might not, be framed the way it once was by the federal government?
It's a good question. I think that I always fall on the side of action and education. As a professor, as a teacher in front of the classroom, I actually have been very keen on remaining objective as much as I can. I mean, I do lean left. My students can tell that I lean left, but I do not try to indoctrinate. But I said something the day after the election. I said that I'm going to be a more partisan professor. So one of the things that we can do, Kimberly, is to be more forthright with our beliefs, and we can not only be more forthright, but we can actually do something greater, which is to do things that we typically don't do on a daily basis. For me, what I started to do 2 years ago with the education work was to just be more involved in community efforts and endeavors, and don't be so consumed with being behind an ivory tower and understanding these issues just from a classroom perspective or from a text or book perspective, that there is a role that I can play that's greater than just educating. And so the answer to the question is that I think that we have to think about creative ways to be more engaged, and that could be joining new organizations or existing organizations. That could also be, mean forming new ones. That could also mean allying ourselves with those who are doing this work. I mean, I'm not an expert on criminal justice reform, but certainly because of my role as a civil rights professor, that I understand it in a way that I can impart knowledge and be and make a contribution in that regard in ways. So I think that just to be more active citizens, to take civic engagement much more seriously as those who are professionals or of us who may be students or lay people, and to really think about what it means to live in a country that continues to criminalize black bodies. I mean, Justin was absolutely right. White supremacy is alive and rampant, institutional white supremacy, as well as just your everyday forms of white supremacy. We need to savor white supremacy and not feel, and not cower, and not be politically correct. And again, this is something that I do in my classrooms, but I think I could do much more even as a teacher.
It's interesting to me when we work with the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office quite a bit, and we also work with Hennepin County, and it's very difficult, or has been very difficult, to get Hennepin County to utter the words racial. We talk about equity for a while. I think we're getting there. But for everybody in this room, you can start normalizing that conversation because it really needs to happen. So most people don't know this, but the Minneapolis Police Department was one of 6 departments in the country that was a recipient of a grant. They're working with something called the National Initiative. Each Minneapolis police officer will receive implicit bias training by the end of this year, procedural fairness training, and then there's a piece about reconciliation. And I'm part of the monthly call, so I get updates on the national initiative. I also talk a lot to the officers responding to the implicit bias training, and by and large, they respond pretty well. You know, sometimes it's officers saying, oh, you mean I will be safer if I don't go in like Rambo? Sometimes it's that. Sometimes people saying, oh, this makes a lot of sense to me. So MPD is working really hard. And you probably wouldn't know that by seeing what the media talks about, because it's always Bob Kroll, talking about what Bob Kroll talks about, instead of some stuff that's really going well for MPD. The Minneapolis City Attorney's Office has also been an excellent partner in trying to figure out, how do we keep people from coming in the door in the first place, especially in these low-level crimes? Because it's trying to get a record expunged after the fact is next to impossible these days with data mining. So how do we keep people from getting in the system in the first place? So what you can all do is support your appointed city attorney, the head of MPD, if you like their policies, and say, hey, you're doing some really good stuff there. I support you. And there are other partners that aren't quite out there doing the same kinds of things, and you can get out there and vote. You can talk to them about, hey, we want to see something different in the criminal justice system. One area that you could really make a lot of difference is thinking about the issue of bail. Most people don't understand that bail is not punishment. The idea behind bail is to get somebody to show up in court. The judge, under the Minnesota Constitution and rules of criminal procedure, is not supposed to set bail unless the judge thinks it's needed for the person to show up or needed to keep the person from committing some kind of harm in the community. Well, a lot of poor people get bail set on them, and this is what happens. Can I use you two as an example? Okay, so let's say the two of you guys are charged with the same, let's say, domestic assault. Same backgrounds, same charge. So you are able to post the $2,400 bail, you are not. So what does that mean? You stay in jail. Maybe you lose your house. If you don't have a salaried job, if you're working fast food or something like that, do you think you have vacation time? Do you think you can call your boss and say, hey, I'm going to be in jail a couple of days. Will you hold my job for me? No. What happens to your pets? What happens to your mental health? Think of what it would be like for each and every one of you to be plucked out of your universe and put in jail, put in a cage, where you had to eat lousy food, be in an awful place. Whereas you are able to post bail. You go about your business. You help your lawyer find witnesses, do what needs to be done. Then we come back for our pretrial. You come back in a nice suit. You're looking good, you're feeling good, you're stressed out because of this case, but you feel pretty good. You're in an orange jumpsuit. And you know what the offer often is? If you plead guilty, you don't have to do any more jail time. So there you are, like, okay, so I have to stay in here if I don't plead guilty and I set it on for trial. And you're like, no, I'm not pleading guilty to it. So you put it on for trial. There's research that says that if you stay in jail for 24 hours or longer, you are much more likely to commit another crime. There's research that says, this is Harvard just came out with a research study a couple of weeks ago. If you are held in custody, you are much more likely to plead guilty. So let's say they both did it. Do we think it's fair that he ends up pleading guilty simply because he needs to get out of jail and he didn't? And his likelihood of success on his case is going to be much higher, research shows, because he's out of custody. What if he didn't do it and he did? He's pleading guilty to something he didn't do because he's got to get out of jail or wants to get out of jail like anybody would. This happens every day in our courthouses. And so this is something you can do something about. Judges need to start looking at a client's ability to pay. And the Department of Justice has said you may not hold somebody in simply because they cannot afford bail, but judges do it every day. So I could go on and on and on giving you examples about things that you can do, but there's so much difference you can make if you educate yourself about the issues in the criminal justice system every day.
So I'm going to just really kind of focus on some of the things I think for me and thinking about it from a policing standpoint is, so recognizing that we have these profound disparities and recognizing even the challenge that oftentimes comes with talking about them in our organizations, especially organizations that have had that are grounded in and built upon white supremacy. The simple reality is, I think that when I start to think about how it is that we begin to make a difference, how is it different in Maplewood? I'm becoming more and more convinced that one of the things that I really want to start having the cops do is that we actually task them, make it a condition or a responsibility, a function of their employment to go out and build and create connections in the community across, in particular across difference. And because when I ask officers, even in our first ring suburban community, tell me about the folks that live in that apartment complex where we get a lot of police calls, and you can imagine the way that gets described. And oftentimes, this is a place where there is higher levels of poverty. There is significantly higher percentage of folks of color. And they will describe them as, the only time we get called there is because of X crime, this stuff, that conflict, whatever it may be. And then you ask the question, how many of you know people, anyone in that building that unrelated, other than the caretaker maybe, knows somebody there that lives there that just wants to have a decent, safe life? And the answer to that question is none of us do. None of us. And so when we start to think about how we make a difference and how we begin to, what makes it easier for me, I think, to have some of these conversations is the fact that I've tried to develop some relationships with people that are different than me. And it has changed my view in many respects, in not just my view of them, my view of me. And that to me becomes, from a prevention standpoint, and I don't dismiss any of the kind of institutional efforts that we need to make to to build a more fair system. But I'm become more and more convinced if I can't start with that practitioner at some level, it becomes so much easier to use practices that are fundamentally unfair or create far more profound disparities down the road. And so for me, it has to be about institutionalizing mechanisms that require our people to create relationships, to reach out, to lean in, to go to where it's uncomfortable. They get paid well to do that, and to talk to people that are different than them. That's at least where I'd like to try to start.
Yeah, I would just say this is a good conversation. Like proximity is really important. So strategies, like I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it's important that we kind of like understand that we live in a country that has a donor class that controls our political system. So like there are a handful of wealthy Americans who actually like just pay all the politicians to do what they want them to do. If you don't believe me, like, so another lesson is like all politics are local, right? So if in our current state house and state senate, it was just taken over by the Republicans, and the only thing consistent about our politics is that every 2 years you get an election, right? Like in the House, you got people running for office, like, so you get new faces, right? The only thing consistent is that the lobbyists are there every year for 10, 20 years. And so like when you think about who elected officials eat with, who they talk to their kids about, who they have relationships with, it is people who work for big fat corporations that are paying them to move an agenda. And politics is all about relationships. So that stuff matters. So if you really want to uncover a strategy, you have to look at where the money comes from. And in Minnesota, we have a very powerful chamber of commerce, statewide chamber of commerce, who will just tell you what they are up to. Like you just go to their website. You can go to the Minnesota Business Partnership website. You can and look at their priorities. I guarantee you, they are not thinking about the same priorities and policies that you are thinking about. And so, like that's one. It's just like being clear about who is in control for real, where the money is, and what their agenda is. So like you gotta be woke. The other thing is about being woke is about yourself. So raise your hand if you or someone you know has a criminal record. We're at a law school, so this should be the rest of y'all are lying. So I'm for real. Like let's do that again. Like raise your hand if you or someone you know has a criminal record. Okay, keep your hands up. All right. So stand up if you should have a criminal record for breaking the law or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Have a seat. Here's the thing: is that this is crucial. Is that we have to tell our story. So people have one assumption about the criminal justice system being here to protect us, right? Protect us from who? From y'all? Because there's some criminals up in here. So think about this for a second. Like we have to tell our story. We have to come out and talk about the people we know and how they've been impacted by the justice system. I think about Ezekiel Caligiuri, who's incarcerated for 32 years. Amy Klobuchar locked him up, right? He just wrote a book, and he's one of our leaders, and he's a very dynamic, brilliant young man who did not commit the crime. He was involved in the crime and probably was guilty of and needed to sit down for a minute probably. But she sentenced him to 32 years because she could, right? We are not safer because Zeke Caligiuri is in prison today. That's just dumb. But we have to tell his story, right? And you have to tell your story in the most powerful way so that we can start coming out. Like I think about this is a really bad comparison. I'm gonna just do it anyways though. I think about the Minnesotans United for All Families campaign where we pushed back against a homophobic policy that would have outlawed marriage in the state constitution of Minnesota. About how that fight, we won that fight by calling people across the state and talking about our loved ones and family members or ourselves who are not, heteronormative but had different identities and from ourselves or ourselves, right? Trying to be as inclusive as possible. I hope that made sense. So what I'm saying is like telling our stories to people who were against that policy actually shifted them and got them to vote no on it in our state. Then went ahead and legalized marriage the next year. Telling our story is very important, but we don't tell the criminal justice story. We don't talk about our nephew who has that DWI. We don't talk about our mom who has that dope dependency. We don't talk about ourselves at one time got caught with a minor or whatever, right? We don't talk about those issues, and so we stay hiding in the shadows and pretend it's impacting someone else when one in 5 Minnesotans has a criminal record. That's 1 million people across our state. Like, it is not a secret. It is a reality that we are living, and we have to talk about it. So that's like the most important strategy, because if we advance that narrative, then it makes it easier to challenge the people who are really in control, which is folks with the money. Helpful?
So I think at this point, I will open it up to the audience for questions. Carmen?
I'm going to try not to dominate this. My name's Carmen McQuitty. I'm actually an attorney here at the U. I represent students who get charged with crimes. And I'm historically a systems person, former public defender, but I represent a lot of people who have been charged with protesting, especially around Black Lives Matter stuff. And so the thing that I've had my own consciousness raised around the conversation around the abolition of the police, and prisons, which for me, I used to laugh about, but I also sort of feel a tug around that. And I feel like you're my guy right here, Jason. So, so I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. And also, I am concerned in terms of, even though I know what the feds do is very different than how our local law enforcement responds, but what is going to happen in a Trump administration around protesting if we do finally take to the streets on mass levels, which I don't know if something will happen that will get to that, because I agree we have to sort of uproot all of this other money stuff. So I'm interested in sort of like Professor Mays, maybe what you think about that in terms of past movements as well.
Just briefly, I think that the presidential administrations, going back to probably all the way to the 30s, certainly maybe even World War I, have always attempted to criminalize the protest activities of various organizations, whether it be communists, socialists, anarchists, whether it be civil rights, Black Power organizations and activists in the 1960s. And you see that even today with Black Lives Matter. And I think that we historically see a retrenchment around allowing groups to exercise certain First Amendment rights, particularly in the realm of free speech and rhetoric. And certainly in the 1960s, Black Power, which when you look at it now and you read it, many of the speeches really has evolved historically as sort of kind of mainstream African American and American thought as it relates to progress. But it was understood to be extremely radical and extremist at the time, and a Democratic president and a Democratic AG's office criminalized the behavior of people like Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown and others. Nixon, and when he took over in '69, Black Panthers. And I think the same thing is happening today with Black Lives Matter, and I'm quite sure you see it. And you can even argue that CVE is part of an overreach to criminalize the bodies of Somali young men who may be nebulously involved in terroristic activities and organizations. Once we read the history of this 20 to 40 years later, we will probably decide that there was an overreach by the Justice Department and states and courts in terms of criminalizing these. By I was reading the transcripts of Judge Michael Davis and some of the things that he was saying from the bench, and he has a lot of pressure on him in terms of trying to save face, because we do live in a time now that we understand this activity to be reprehensible, and we are there is something that we all identify with as the war on terror. But underneath that is the war on ordinary people, and there's a war on communities that's involved in that as well. And I think that once we get further down the road, we'll realize that we send a lot of innocent young black Somali men to jail because they either one, raised their voices, two, maybe was trying to check out some websites. Now, were some of them involved in some really hardcore terrorist activities? Probably a few. But we don't do our due diligence in trying to find out what's going on. We dragnet and then legally put people in jail. So again, I think that you see this throughout history, and I think that we have to insist on people's right to speak truth to power, and to insist that that American rights are First Amendment rights are protected through and through.
So in responding to your consciousness raising, I think we get to consciousness raising by educating ourselves. How many of you have seen the documentary 13th? Okay, everybody in here should see it. How many of you have read The New Jim Crow? Slavery by Another Name, The Warmth of Other Suns. Yes, because I think it's hard for us to argue about these issues and persuade about these issues unless we understand the historical context. I mean, how many people know that Nixon pretty outwardly declared a war on black people, on the drug war was against black people? Yet today, 2 years ago, or 2014 statistics in Hennepin County, let's see, we had a population then of about 11%, or 11% of the population of Hennepin County was black. Cases disposed of that year in 2014, what was the percentage black? 42%. You go into our courtrooms where people are charged with drug crimes and you see a sea of black faces. There's solid research out there that said white people use drugs more than black people. So why do we have a sea of black faces in our courtrooms? Why are we not doing something about that? And it just, you've talked about probation. I think Minnesota is probably the second state with the highest numbers of people on probation. And we do that because we consider ourselves liberal. We don't send people to prison, we put them on probation. I had the pronounced probation years pulled from the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. If you are charged with a drug offense in Hennepin County, your average pronounced probationary sentence is 3 years. In St. Cloud, it's 10 years. So that person is disenfranchised many years longer, and it's totally arbitrary, completely arbitrary. It depends on what the judges want to do. So I think everybody needs to educate themselves, and there's plenty of stuff out there. I mean, how many people know that our black service members who wanted to take advantage of the GI Bill couldn't? That's where redlining comes from. I mean, there's so many ways of understanding this historically that gives us the power to then talk about how policies today continue to have a disparate impact on people of color.
Yeah, just real quick to talk to the police, abolish prisons and police. Like the first thing we gotta remember is like there's a reason this brother sitting next to me has a social work degree, right? It's because a lot of times people go into policing because they want to help communities. I would argue that our current system of how we do criminal justice, from policing to sentencing and the judicial and to incarceration to what happens when people come home, is not helping. It doesn't keep us safe. It just kind of, it serves other purposes. And it is also just not necessary. It is actually not necessary. So what am I talking about? Because that sounds crazy, liberal, and whatever, right? So let me just be clear. First, you gotta go back to the source. Like, where did policing start from? We did not have policing in this country until you had a division of wealth, right? Police was developed to police the division of wealth, like the poor folks and the wealthy folks. The merchant class said we need to protect our stuff, right? Because these cats are coming for it. Bacon's Rebellion, right? And we see this over and over and over again through history. Slavery, right? The overseer was the person who was supposed to like watch over the slaves, right? This was typically an uneducated white dude from up the block who just needed a job, right? And they gave him a whip, a gun, and said, keep them niggas in line. And this is what our actual prisons. You see an uptake in prisons and like the actual like the buildings of the prison like foundation of what we call prison today after slavery, when you had convict leasing, right? If you look at the history of our country and what our criminal justice system has evolved from, the amoeba that you track it back to is racism, classism, and misogyny, and all of those ugly things that we love in America. It's not public safety. It's about protecting the wealth. I'll say it again. It is a system designed to protect the wealth and property of the, to protect the profits and wealth, the profits and property of the wealthy, and divide and control the rest of us. That is at the end of the day, the system will always operate in that function. So how do you get rid of police? How do you get rid of prisons? One, I'm sure Officer Schnell has an opinion on this one, but like a lot of problems that police are asked to deal with aren't police problems. They're not. So like we know that nothing stops a bullet like a job. So I'm thinking about this. There's a shooting. My wife works Northside. There's a shooting in, across the street from her office where she works with youth and whatnot. Like, and what was the shooting over? The brother shot a brother. He's trying to pull an Omar. He robbed a brother. He was selling dope. And it's like these are economic problems. These aren't like hatred problems or evil problems. These are economic problems. And who do we call to address this economic problem? We call the police, right? We will never solve that problem. What we have to do is organize in alternative economies. So a cutting edge on this is sex workers, right? So think about how the police respond to sex workers. Think about this for a second. We arrest women and incarcerate and criminalize women who have made the decision or who have been coerced and forced into sex work, right? And so we criminalize those women. And there's been all kinds of reports of how we treat the men who show up in sex work, right? And I would just say that like if we created worker protections, not legalizing, not like there's all kinds of options that people have suggested around sex workers. I'm just gonna be honest, I'm not the one to run that campaign. This is not my expertise. But there is a suggestion that if we created better worker conditions in the sex trade, that what you would have is you would have women or the people who are operating in that field be able to have more control and more power over what happens in that field, right? And that would reduce the need to call the police. I'm really struggling with, so I should talk about something I do know about, the dope game. So, and by the way, I see the Eldridge Cleaver poster. This is not a new idea. Huey Newton was trying to organize prostitutes in Oakland back in the day, and it was actually like working. So the other one is the dope game, as an alternative economy. Well, what are the worker protections we could have for brothers selling drugs, right? We know that harm reduction works. We know that people want to get high. We know that we are currently living in a situation where the same day we elected Trump, three states voted to legalize recreational marijuana, and we still have millions of brothers in prison for selling weed. This is an economic problem. This is not a policing problem. If we learn how to deal with our alternative economies and put worker protections there, what we will see is a reduction in the need to call the police, a reduction in the need to fund the police. And maybe some of those funds that go to police could go to community resources that help protect those worker protections or enforce worker protections for alternative economies. this kind of divest invest strategy is something that people are really excited about. And so it's not about training and whatnot. I actually think that we just need to like first believe that something different is possible. Or like prisons. A prison should not be a place that is like this idea this idea that we like, like the Bastille is like a good thing, right? Like we send people out, hours away from their families and make people like, that is insane. Like you want to like prisons have terrible morale when people are disconnected from their families. And then prison guards jobs are difficult, right? Like this is a horrible structure. We need to deconstruct that structure where prison is a place where people are connected to community, not separated from community. You can't hold somebody accountable for their actions if they're not in relationship with you. It just doesn't work. So people are sitting in a box and we are warehousing people right now. And we are not holding them accountable for anything. Not to mention, and I'll end on this point, what the hell do you get out of it? We don't even ask this question. So raise your hand if you have been the victim of a crime. Yeah. So I can tell you about a brother who robbed my crib on Christmas Day. This is my homeboy, right? He was hustling, he was doing his thing in alternative economy. Robbed my crib on Christmas Day. We called the police. The police show up. We file a police report. All that stuff, right? And it's like at the end of the day, like, if we sit him down in a cell, I don't get my stuff back. If we sit him down in a cell, like he and I, our relationship is broken, and we probably got hood beef now, because now I'm a snitch for snitching on his brother who stole my stuff on Christmas Day. If you know what I'm saying, like what kind of healing do I get from this current process? I get nothing. And we put $80 billion into a system that gives us
Nothing.
So I'm saying, like, we have to re-envision how this works. Like, not to belabor the point, but like, I do think it's worth mentioning that 90% of the people who 90% of the men who commit sexual assault are walking around free, which tells you like our system is a joke. It is not here to protect you. And we have to start thinking about like even the people who do go to prison, like how does that benefit us? What I would like to see is a woman or a man or somebody who experiences sexual assault or violent physical assault actually have an opportunity for healing. And I want the people who commit those crimes to have an opportunity for not necessarily redemption, but just to grow as a human being, to get beyond the point where they thought it was necessary for them to torture another human being and take something precious from them. Our current system has no path to get to that point.
Just to follow up on that point, a real brief example that I want to give. So Keisha, Justin knows, went to school with Keisha. She has a friend who he sold drugs, got caught. I think about 4 or 5 years ago. Fed prison, 25 years for selling drugs. Michigan, he's been in prison in Michigan. They sent him to the Fed prison in Duluth, dropped the sentence by 20 years. He only has 5 or 4 years left to serve. To whose benefit was it to lock this young man up for 25 years? And what are the implications of having a judge one day wake up and say, you know what, he don't need to spend 25 years in jail for selling drugs in Michigan, maximum security, send him back to Minnesota, to Duluth, the federal prison, reduce the sentence by 20 years, and maybe he can spend another 4, maybe even less, and he can come on home. Now, when she told me the story, it just put a human face on the problem in a way that I had never thought about. Because, again, this is somebody that she knows, that we know. And until it hits home like that, until we think about it in those terms, you're absolutely right. I think we will never really kind of understand what's at stake. I just wanted to...
Do you have a question? Or go here.
Thank you. going to put Chief Schnell on the spot here a little bit. Veronica Surgis with the Appellate Public Defender's Office. And in the interest of transparency, I do have some degree of knowledge about your force in particular, some personal knowledge about some folks on your force in particular. I think that we can all agree that reform is necessary, not just along racial lines, but along, I mean, the way that many police interact with a variety of folks. I love what you had to say about reconnecting with the community and about building relationships with the people who live in those buildings, who are on the streets, who commit the crimes. I love that. I think that that's huge. How is that going to happen when the thin blue line has not been erased and there's no signs of it being erased? And what are you doing in particular with your force to erase that thin blue line, to get officers, to give them the space that they, maybe even to make them take the space they need to process the things that they see, the things that they deal with on a daily basis, so that they don't have to be in this thin blue bubble? So in other words, how are you going to enforce that without erasing the line?
So, I mean, it's the essence of the question. So on the accountability front, I mean, literally, I walked in here about 10 minutes before this thing was going to start because I got served with a lawsuit as I was leaving, and this lawsuit is related specifically to policy and that we're enacting in our department. And the lawsuit is from the union, who is concerned about a policy that they think would be harmful to their interests. And I think as we look at this, we have to, what exposes this is, I cannot be, and we were talking about this beforehand, I cannot be entirely out of the culture and still influence it, which is as somebody who's a part of the system, right, and working in policing, I have to have a foot in and a foot out. Somebody said, you know, when you're retired, maybe you can really help pull. I actually think the opportunity for me to do that is highest right now. And as I get closer to retirement, it becomes easier to say, I'm just going to be utterly honest. It becomes much easier for me to say, I have less to lose, right? So I'm gonna raise the specter, ask the harder questions, try and create both a space, try and make sure that we're increasing the pressure on officers to behave in accordance with our policies, much deeper engagement with our community about what policing should look like in Maplewood. What should that look like? And we're having these conversations with a use of force work group that was impaneled, and it's been incredibly eye-opening and really difficult conversations. And I can tell you will have profound implications in terms of the line side of policing, right? Because there's deep concern about the fact that we're allowing the folks we police to decide what our policies should look like around use of force and those sorts of things. And at the same time, I want to make sure that the cops feel like they're supported, that their wellness, because they do get into and see a ton of really, really, really shitty stuff. And as a result of that, I think we're trying to push to say we need to make sure that they're well as well. And we've implemented just mandatory mental health check-ins for our cops as a first year. We just finished all 55 of us, myself included, when sat down with somebody who focuses on the trauma stuff related to this, and we're trying to address it because we have to take. I want to make sure that they feel like they're taken care of. At the same time, we're asking the really hard questions, and I think we have to focus on the need to repair harm. I think how do we get people more to a restorative place? I'll honestly, it's hard for me to wrap myself around. We should just disband the police. I mean, it's just tough, right? You're part of it. You see value. I see value in what we do, and so it's tough. It's tough to do that. At the same time, I'd love to see a world where where that could happen, and perhaps the models that get presented are there. it's not easy. And you know, there's been things, discipline that I've issued that many of you would say, my God, it gave that away. He gave that unacceptable conduct away. And I myself may feel that in many instances, but I also have to recognize what I know what we can sustain in the long haul. And then I also am mindful of the fact that the minute I use a big stick inside, this whole notion of the reinforcement of the paradigm of punishment, how is it the cops are going to respond to people on the street? And so can I provide an opportunity for cops to redeem themselves? Just really quick anecdote. We had a woman came in whose husband was killed in a motorcycle accident. Somebody ran a red light, and he ran his motorcycle into the side of this van. And she came in one day, and this 3 years earlier, and said, you know, I really feel like my husband's memory and what happened, there was no accountability for the person who pulled out in front of my husband. And even beyond that, I just don't feel like there was as much care given to me as I tried to get a sense of what happened to him. And I told her she could make a complaint, but I had to be honest, the likelihood that discipline was going to come from this was not great. And I also offered her the opportunity to meet with those cops face to face. Now, here's where it became interesting. The cops were not willing to meet with her face to face. And for me to I couldn't compel them to do that. Now I did, and the two of our command staff met with him, and I can tell you it was an immensely eye-opening experience. And she talked about the story, right? The story of her husband and what it meant, what the loss of her husband meant to her. And for me, that would have been an incredible. I mean, it was immensely powerful for me. I wasn't even working in Maplewood at the time that happened, but I can't imagine what that could have meant to them. And the next time they respond to one of these things, what it could have meant to the people that they respond to. So as we look to the ways that we try to hold people accountable inside and build systems of accountability, I'm really hoping that we can get to a place where we don't utilize the same mechanisms that have proved unsuccessful in the criminal justice system.
Hi, I'm a student here on the campus, and sometimes when I go to discussions, I sense that there's a reluctance to talk about the institution that we're a part of and how it is implicated in this whole process. So I was gratified that Mr. Terrell mentioned that the university is currently struggling with the ban the box issue, and I'm going to put a little more flesh on that. In 2007, the university started asking on its admissions application forms a criminal background question. It did not ask it before that date. The question it was asking at that time was, have you ever been convicted of anything more serious than a minor traffic violation? And in parentheses, it said juvenile misdemeanor felony. And then a year ago, they decided to change the question in response to some protests, including the Who's Diversity group that occupied President Kaler's office. This was one of their demands. And the question became, have you ever been convicted of a felony or have pending felony charges? And the second question, have you ever been held legally responsible for a sexual offense, either as an adult or as a juvenile, or have pending charges in that respect? 2 years ago, I brought this issue to the university administration, in particular to the Office for Equity and Diversity, because I received an email asking me what made me feel welcome or unwelcome on campus as part of the campus climate movement. I was referred to Director Hewitt's office, the Office for Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, and I met with a woman there, and I eventually received a letter from them. After I received the letter, I asked Ms. Hewitt to meet with her. She declined in writing. I asked the head of the Office for Equity and Diversity to meet with her. She declined. I did meet with her because I signed up for her open house office hours, and she had to meet with me then. These questions, I mean, a couple of you have mentioned that the criminal justice system at every step of the process is disproportionately affects people of color, in particular African American males. The university is well aware that studies show that. The studies overwhelmingly have shown that that's the case, so that they know there's racial implications in asking these criminal background questions. So they must have some good reason for asking them based on evidence. And the reason they have continually given, both orally and in writing, is that this enhances campus safety to ask these questions. For 2 years, I have been asking in emails university administrators to point me toward any evidence showing this enhances campus safety. I have suggested maybe you could look at campus safety before the university started asking these questions and after. Silence to that suggestion. I have suggested maybe you could look at schools that don't ask these questions and compare their campus safety rates with the campus safety rates at the University of Minnesota. Silence to that suggestion. There are no studies that show that asking criminal background questions on college application forms enhances campus safety. There are 2 studies that say it has no effect. There's very little in the academic literature on this. I am amazed that the faculty at the University of Minnesota, who know that these questions were being asked, and they should have known it if they had followed the Who's Diversity Occupation of President Kaler's office a year ago in February. I am amazed they're not up in arms publicly about this issue. I am amazed that the Office for Equity and Diversity has been totally unwilling to issue a public statement saying, maybe given the nature of the racism in the criminal justice system, maybe these are inappropriate questions to ask on a college admissions application form. The university now is about to eliminate the felony question, but they're going to keep the much tougher question to fight against, which is the sexual offense question. And there are reasons I believe that they are not considering that should lead them in the direction of even eliminating the sexual offense question. President Obama in June came out with a statement encouraging colleges to eliminate these questions. And once again, the University of Minnesota is way behind the curve on an issue that involves racism. Thank you.
So just for clarification, the Office for Equity and Diversity does not have the authority to make this decision, and we have had the opportunity to participate in conversations about what the question will look like and to share our perspective, but it isn't an Equity and Diversity Office issue. I mean, it's not something we can individually as an office change. So it is, I'm not sure about where the status of the question exists now in terms of what will remain and what won't remain there. But just to clarify that before we go on to the panelists.
All I asked was that you made a
So,
statement about it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Hey, Chuck.
so let's,
Chuck,
if
I
we
got
could
you.
go on for the panel.
Chuck, I got you. I mean, at the end of the day, like it'd be good, no matter who you are, to just or what your position in the institution is, or from student to administration, to take a position against questions like that. Best practices say that one, like, it does not increase safety, right? So first of all, there's that. 2, it is any conversations around safety is nonsense, because what it is about liability. I mean, y'all, I hope you read Missoula, and I hope you watched The Hunting Grounds, right? Like there is a movement across the country to address sexual assault, the epidemic of sexual assault on college campuses, and we need to support that movement. Period in the story. Questions like this are a lazy tactic to avoid liability issues for institutions, and they don't cut to the actual issue of the culture of rape culture and all kinds of white supremacy, heteronormative, cisgendered male entitlement that is just running rampant on college campuses across this entire country. I mean, as a brother too, I will own my own privilege as a cisgendered man. I will what we are taught as men is a huge issue, right? That is what we have to start challenging. Questions like this on applications don't even begin to scrape the surface on the real issue that the problem that we are actually trying to solve. So I just want to put that out there. And I think, the campaign manager and me would just be like, I could see a really easy path on this one. I just think your office should take a position. I think people in this room should take a position as well.
Other questions?
So, kind of wrapping this all up again, when we talk about systems reform, a common term that's thrown around is restorative justice. So, in your system, what would that look like, both realistically or like current steps we could take, like right now or within a couple of years? And then what would that look like, broad scale in the future, if I could do whatever I want?
These things have to be worked out in community. Like, I'm not gonna sit up here and give you like the blueprint. But what I do know is that, like, I've worked with juvenile justice for a long time, and I've worked with kids who committed crimes and were more successful moving forward when they had an opportunity to talk about the crime with the community that was impacted by the crime. We know that these practices there's indigenous practices. We know that there's community practices around restorative justice that just work to create space for healing, accountability, and like the way I look at it this way, like justice, our current system is not about justice, it's about punishment. Punishment is about you did something and now these are the consequences we will levy on you. Justice, that's backward thinking. Justice is forward thinking. Justice says this happened in this moment in time, and this is how we're going to move forward together as a community. And that's what so anything around restorative justice, I would just want it to be that. It's about people being able to take responsibility, a community being able to be engaged, and folks being able to come up with solutions that carry us forward, and not just like throw people away in boxes. That's not justice. As just to paint a picture, if the justice is scale, right? You can't act like our liberation is bound to each other. What happens to you happens to me. And so I can't get free unless you get free. So if it's a scale, right now what we do is we cut off one of the scales and we put it in a box, leaving the other scale to just drop to the floor and just stay there. And we can't do that. We need to figure out a way to balance things out so that we are still in relationship and that we can move forward. Does that help?
We actually, excuse me, have some restorative justice programs in Hennepin County, the justice system. They're primarily with the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office, and they really cover low-level crimes, so I think they could be used a lot more. The nice thing about them is that usually a person doesn't walk away from them with a conviction. So I think they could be more widespread throughout the system. The other piece of it that I think is really important, and I think you talked about for-profit prisons, all of that kind of thing. A lot of these programs that clients can participate in cost money. And they are offered by third-party vendors, and so the judges cannot waive the fees. And so we have quite a few programs that people can participate in if they can afford to pay for them. And that's a problem. So there are some good restorative justice opportunities, but not nearly enough.
I would just say what I would love to see tried here is, because I think it would be a little bit easier pill as a starting point to swallow, would be to decodify the juvenile justice system in Minnesota, and try and rebuild one based upon a restorative model. I mean, it's been done in New Zealand. It's become imperfect, but at some level, it does exactly what was mentioned, is that it provides an opportunity for community to have the opportunity to address and attempt to repair some of the harm that resulted, even in the most serious of crime, and I think can make us safer, because we know that the communities that are more connected, generally speaking, have less crime, or when there is crime or wrongdoing, are better able to resolve it because of those connections. And I think that's what a restorative model would provide us, and I think we could learn a lot from trying with a juvenile justice focus, and I think politically it would be easier pill for people to swallow than wide scale.
And I just wrote, there's a connection between restorative practices and historical inquiry. And I said, young black people who know their history don't commit crimes. I have no research on that. That's all anecdotal. But we are in the middle of writing curriculum that has at the center of it restorative justice practices and African American historical content.
At the end of our time, if we want to give a applause to the panelists. Thank you, guys.
I got to send you something about that private prison.